So guys, we're going to continue our conversation around the 28 Days Later franchise. Obviously, recently we had the release of the 28 Years Later trailer for the newest installment in the franchise, and well, the hype, the anticipation, the viewership figures for that 28 Years Later trailer was just off the scale, incredible. You guys are so excited for that movie. I'm so excited for the movie, but now we have even more news and information about where 28 Days Later, the franchise, is going in the future after the 28 Years Later movie. So we do know that there's going to be a brand new trilogy coming. Obviously, 28 Years Later is going to be the first movie in the trilogy, but now we have the title and the release date for the next movie after 28 Years Later, and it's called 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. So this is pretty interesting, guys. Let's dive into this article. Let's see what we can learn about the next 28 Years Later movie, and see if it has any connection to what we've seen so far in the 28 Years Later trailer. So this comes to us from bloodydisgusting.com. Nia DaCosta's 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, releasing January 2026. So it's coming out immediately following the next year. So we're going to get these movies pretty damn quick after the other. We don't have to wait like 2 or 3 years for the next movie after 28 Years Later. We have 28 Years Later releasing in 2025. And then immediately in 2026, we have 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, the second movie in the new trilogy, which is great. I hate it when we know that movies are coming out and we have to wait like 3, 4, 5 years in between, kind of like what they've done with the Batman movie. We had the Batman and we've had to wait like 5, 6 years to get the Batman Part 2. It just kills the hype, the anticipation, the momentum. Fans become frustrated having to wait so long between, you know, different parts of different movie trilogies. And but it looks like here they're putting out these movies quick. They're capitalizing on the hype, which is a great thing to do. So let's get into these details here. Obviously, we have this image here. Remember, this came from the trailer of 28 Years Later. We had this kind of motif within the trailer that was focusing around this kind of bone structure within the trailer. And we saw some of the characters. We saw Ralph Fiennes. We saw Jodie Comer with the new baby. There was that scene where they turned up to this kind of bone temple within the forest. We're not sure what kind of role this plays within the movie or what kind of connection it has to the characters. Also, we saw that character with like the witch doctor mask or the kind of like shaman type of mask. Is that connected to this bone temple? Is there a new kind of religious cult or sect that's going to be arising within the movie? Is that going to be part of what's going on here? As this all unfolds, it's going to be interesting to find out where they're going with this franchise. So here's the details anyway. In the wake of 28 Years Later next summer, the Infection franchise will continue the sequel 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, which Sony has already dated for theatrical release. Directed by Nia DaCosta, who directed the rebooted Candyman movie, but she also directed The Marvels, obviously one of the worst performing MCU movies ever, so make of that what you will. 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple will release on January 16th, 2026. This will be the second movie in a planned trilogy of new movies. This is great. So they're moving on these movies pretty damn quickly. We're going to get 28 Years Later next year, 2025. And then immediately following the next year, we're going to get 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. This is great to hear. We don't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years in between the sequels of these movies. Kind of like what's going on with the Batman 1 and Batman Part 2. We've had to wait years between the movies. It kills the anticipation, the hype. People begin to forget about the franchise. So the fact that they're moving on these movies so quickly and we're getting them year after year is a great thing. They're building on the hype, the anticipation, and kind of the hunger that's built around these movies. They've seen that the feedback is incredible. So making a trilogy of these movies was absolutely the right choice at Sony. And hopefully the box office reflects that as well. So, but first, 28 Years Later will be unleashed in theaters June 20th, 2025. So, in 28 Years Later, here's the synopsis, guys, for those of you who may not know what the synopsis for this upcoming 28 Years Later movie is. It's been almost 3 decades since a rage virus escaped a biological weapons laboratory, and now, still a ruthlessly enforced quarantine, some have found ways to exist amidst the infected. One such group of survivors lives on a small island connected to the mainland by a single heavily defended causeway. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission to the dark heart of the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that mutated not only the infected but other survivors as well. Where it says here, mutated not only the infected but other survivors, that makes me think that we could get different types of like mutant infected that we're going to be coming across, kind of like The Last of Us, you know, where they have different stages of the infection in The Last of Us, and different kind of mutant mutations of the infected. We could potentially see something like that in this movie, which would be kind of a really interesting take on the 28 Days franchise. You know, you could have a massive mutant kind of infected person. You could have a person who's in the early stages of infection. So they could have sort of different kind of looks to them, depending on the environment, depending on the stage of infection that they're at. And we could play around with that mutation of the infected. So that could be an interesting concept here. So, from what we understand, Nia DaCosta has already wrapped filming on the Bone Temple, with plot details likely kept under wraps until 28 Years Later comes along next summer. Interesting to note, however, that there is literally a Bone Temple glimpsed in the official trailer for 28 Years Later, seen above. Yeah, so we already talked about that kind of at the beginning of this video. We have this kind of Bone Temple in the middle of a forest. All of these kind of skulls here piled up, and then we got these kind of logs that have been cut around this kind of Bone Temple, and they're all painted white. And it's very, very creepy, very weird. I have no idea what's going on here. Maybe some of you guys know. If you have a theory or you know potentially what's going on, jump into the comment section and let us know. Which seems to have a pivotal location for the new trilogy. Based on trailer views, the 28 Years Later is already tracking to be a massive box office hit for Sony in 2025, so we can be pretty certain that the ambitious trilogy plan will ultimately pan out. Stay tuned on all things 28 Years Later, and don't forget, Sony just bought Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later back to digital outlets this week, now available to buy or rent. Yeah, that's another massive thing as well, guys. So if you want to watch the original 28 Days Later, which is a classic, if you haven't seen it by now, guys, you're robbing yourselves of a great movie experience. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's very gritty. It's very low budget in the way that it's shot. It came out 2002, I think. So bear in mind, it's very low budget, but it's that low budget, the low budgetness of that movie adds to the creepy factor. So it actually goes a long way to helping the movie be more creepy, in my opinion. So just bear that in mind if you haven't seen it. But guys, do check out 28 Days Later if you haven't seen it. Absolute classic of a movie. You won't regret watching it. Absolutely incredible movie. And I love this poster here. The end is extremely fucking nigh. That's marketing for you right there. So that's kind of where we are. So that's kind of a short but significant update to where the 28 Years Later trilogy is going next. We have 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, releasing January 16th, 2026. So like I already said, we're getting these movies very quickly, one after the other, which is great. We don't have to wait years for the next installment, which sucks, kills the hype, kills the anticipation. So Sony is moving on it quick, which is great. It's going to capitalize on the hype, the anticipation, and hopefully, as these films come out, the box office grows, more people come and watch it, word of mouth spreads, the movies do great, we get more of them, and the franchise is a hit, and as fans, we win, as the studio, they win, everybody goes away happy. So guys, jump into the comment section, let me know what you think about this. What do you think that this Bone Temple, what kind of significance do you think this plays in the new trilogy? You know, how is it gonna interact with the characters? Ultimately, what is it gonna mean? You know, and that kind of weird shaman type of masked character that we saw in the 28 Years Later trailer. What do you think that's about? Do you have any theories? I'd love to hear your input here, guys, because I'm really curious as to where this franchise is going to go. But either way, super excited. So let me know in the comment section. As always, be sure to hit that like and become a subscriber of the channel if you haven't already. Being a subscriber goes a long way to helping support my content, guys, so I'd really, really appreciate that. And as always, I will see you in the next video.